Okay, it's story time. So I'm making this video as a story in conjunction with the Rainbow Serpent journey for those of you who are doing the 7-month process of working through the bodies, and we are in the area of the heart, and I've referred to this story and I wanted to create a separate video for it. So even if you are coming across this video and you are not doing this journey, it's still a good story. I love stories, I love storytelling, and I want to share with you a story that really was almost like a foundational starting point for me as far as accessing the heart field, the sacred chambers of the heart, and how that has evolved over my journey so far, and how we can access it through very differing spaces. So as we all know, we have such different perspectives and makeups and insights that take us on our journey of life, and the way you journey into your heart will be unique for you. But I just found it really fascinating how I have continued to come back into this space that for me is a literal space. This is not just a felt field, it's an actual dimensional space that has texture, color, different beings. I mean, I'm a visual person, I'm a bit of a creative, so I think my imagination is, very textured. So perhaps that has colored my experience, but I'd be really interested to hear of anyone else who's had similar journeys into their heart spaces. And we know that different meditation techniques, breathing exercises, different experiences in life, whether that be, supported with different plant medicines, for example, or just, even traumatic experiences, like all of these different avenues, we find ways in through life into that space. And I believe once you've connected into that internal architecture of the heart field, it is an infallible space that I can only imagine that it's what all those monks are doing up in the monasteries. Like, they're not just sitting still. I always thought, how boring is that? Why would you want to just sit and meditate? Well, they've got a whole universe going on inside of them. Our inner worlds are so amazing. And as a global traveler, as a explorer, as someone who has traveled far and wide all across the globe, I realized I could use this desire for being a bit of a gypsy, being a curious cat, using that energy to go inside and explore all the inner spaces. And really my dream realms, my inner realms are just as textured as my outer explorations. And so I wanted to share sort of really where this all started. And this is a beautiful space for me to come back to realize as I'm writing a book at the moment, and all of these stories are pouring forth, all of these memories. And this was the beginning point, really. So let's begin this story at the beginning, at the sacred source. Well, it's funny because that is the name of a place I worked, a little bookshop in Glenferrie Road in Melbourne. And this is where my story starts, but there is a prelude to how I even came to that space and all the magical alignments that brought me there. And I will share a bit more about that in a whole nother story, because I have a feeling, like, as I'm writing and as I'm remembering and as I'm telling stories, that I'm realizing there's all these little links in a chain. So yes, at the tender age of 17, I think it was, I was off overseas traveling through Europe, and I had a very profound awakening and like my memories returning when I was in the Languedoc area of the south of France. And at that age, I didn't really know much about anything. I was just naively just sort of bumbling along, like, you know, the Fool card in the tarot. You see that young person with the knapsack over their back, and they're just blindly walking into the horizon, not aware they're about to fall off a cliff or something. So yeah, it was like that. I was very fresh-eyed and very open, and I had a whole lot of experiences that I will share with you at another time. But what I found really interesting, and why I give you that little prelude, is when I came back from my travels, I guess I was maybe 18. It was definitely 18, maybe I was even 19. I can't remember, but it was a long time ago. And I was looking for work, and I was handing out my resume in my local area. And I came into this bookshop, and the couple that owned the bookshop at the time, I had this really beautiful resonance with them. And it turned out that the man had actually he was from an area in France where I'd visited. He came from Carcassonne. And I really had a deep resonance with both of them, actually. And his wife, who I'm still connected with today, handed me a book called The Treasures of Montségur. So Montségur is an ancient fortress. Well, it was the last stand of the Cathars, and it's an ancient sun temple. And again, I'll go more into all those stories because I've visited those places again, you know, later on in life with more understanding. But when I was there the first time, you know, as I said, I was just so open, and I had all these very deep memories, but I had no idea or no context of what it was about. And this book that she gave me the history and the story of these people. So if you don't know about the Cathar people, it's certainly worth looking into their story. And I'll share a little bit more about that because it's really fascinating, and I feel like it's very poignant for these times. Basically, these were the people that were living in the heart and living in alignment with nature and attunement with nature. So before all the crusades came and all the the church came and like basically wiped everyone out across continents, like all the witch burnings and everything that went on throughout history, these were, you know, some of the people of the lands before that time. And yeah, when we travel across the world and we have an attunement or a resonance for these songs, these memories that are held within the earth, we remember, we see, we dream, we feel, we have these cathartic moments. So that was a real beginning of my journey. So anyway, coming back to the sacred source, because of this beautiful connection with this couple, I got the job, and I spent my days working in this shop, cleaning the crystals and arranging them on their shelves, making sure all the books look neat. We had psychic development courses and all kinds of different workshops and readers in the shop. So, you know, that was my daily hangout. I had lots of unusual customers, lots of unusual experiences, and I also got to sit in a lot of the workshops. So I really did develop my understanding and deepened into the mystery, so to speak. Anyway, one day I was sitting at my desk and I saw a book that had a symbol on the front of it, a symbol that is very popular nowadays. In fact, you see it everywhere. It's the flower of life symbol. But back then, you know, like we're talking 20 years ago or around that time, even more, it wasn't that familiar. It wasn't familiar to me at the time. And I saw this bluish, purplish book and this golden emblem, and it kept on capturing my attention. But, you know, I was busy doing things and serving customers and getting on with my job. And eventually this book, literally, it's like this sigil, came off the wall, hovered right in front of me. And it just got my attention. It's really interesting because, you know, I'm a bit dyslexic, so I'm not a huge reader. I don't really read that much, but I do love picture books. I love symbols. I love colors. And I picked up this book and I was happy to see that it was actually full of pictures. And there was lots of really interesting things in this book. There were a lot of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and symbology in there, and things about the pyramids and all kinds of stuff. And I thought, wow, this is fascinating. And I ended up reading this book, and it was what was really great for me specifically in my type of way I perceive, and I really believe the way it's easier for all of us to perceive, is this book was written specifically to be one chapter really focusing on left hemisphere brain stuff, which is a lot about geometry, mathematics, science, all the logical, practical ways we receive information. And then the other chapter was all about history, mythology, mysticism, all of these more pictorial, the whole book was pictorial, but it was kind of written like it spoke to both halves of the brain in a way that was very cohesive. And this way of communication really worked for me. I was like, wow, really blown away. And of course I had to read the next book. And this book was written by a man called Drunvalo Melchizedek. And for those of you that don't know him, he's written quite a few books. There was 2 in the volumes of The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, which was the book that led me on this journey. And then he's also written a book called Living in the Heart and I believe Serpent of Light. So these books were really pivotal in my awakening journey into being very attuned to the earth, attuned to my heart field, and attuned to the truth of reality. Because there is so much out there that is a distraction to what the truth is. And I've always been a truth seeker, and I've always been so curious, and I've always had a very open mind. So this really set me off on a whole journey. So once I read one of his books, I went on to all the others, and Drunvalo has done a lot of integrative work with the HeartMath Institute. So for those of you that are familiar with the coherent heart field and using breath as a way to regulate our field, our toroidal field around our heart, I think Joe Dispenza does a lot of this as well in his meditations and breath works to get into this field. So there's a lot of fantastic research out there in the field of the heart. But, at the time in the book, there was, a list of sequence of breaths to follow to activate the Merkaba field. And although that was really great, nothing could have really prepared me to actually having that experience within a group. And so it wasn't long after that I read this book that I saw that Drunvalo was actually in Australia doing a Living in the Heart workshop at Marysville, which is a beautiful highland place in Victoria, stunning place. It actually very sadly got burnt by the bushfires a while back, but at the time I saw this, I'm like, I have to go. It was just a no-brainer. So I went on this workshop, a 3-day retreat in Marysville, and with a group of other beautiful seekers, we were guided through this process, this breathing technique, into the activation of our Merkaba fields and into the sacred chambers of the heart. Now, when I was reading about it, it was sounding quite complicated because he's saying there's the feminine pathway and the masculine pathway. And, it doesn't matter if you're male or female, like certain brains like to work a certain way. So there's very specific steps if you have that very practical, analytical brain that likes to follow steps to get somewhere. But the feminine path is very much like a free-for-all, like however you end up in that space, however your soul guides you to that space, you know, is very intuitive and visual and sensual, I guess. You know, it's an embodied experience. So either way, somehow I ended up in that space. And this is where the journey really begins, and why I want to share this story with you, because it is this space, the sacred heart field, that I've returned to time and time again, and it is a actual space. I hold myself up from saying a physical space because maybe it is, I don't know, but it is a incredibly like rich realm that is so full of visual information that feels more real than real, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's an actual space here, perhaps on this planet or perhaps somewhere else, but it certainly is an inner space. And I'd be really curious for those of you that have also experienced a visual heart field, like what you see, because for me, I'm returning to the same place time and time again, and it's really interesting that I've had different pathways into this space, but this was my first experience of really being fully lucidly awake within a meditational space. So I was there in a room with a bunch of other people with our eyes shut, meditating. Perhaps we were being guided, I can't remember, but I was having a whole movie experience inside myself. So this is what happened. Once I entered into this deep space of the heart, I awoke to find myself in a beautiful valley. I was laying in a green sort of patch of grass, of clovers. I just remember seeing lots of clovers. It's beautiful, soft, green, rolling hills in a valley. And I could see down below there was a beautiful river on the floor of the valley, and the sun was making that river sparkle. I could feel the wind on my skin. I could hear the birds and see the butterflies. It was very visceral. It was a very real experience. And then I looked up to my right, just behind me, and I saw a cave. And so I thought, I'm going to go into that cave. I went up to the mouth of the cave and entered, and saw that just beyond the threshold, there was another room, a step up into another entrance within the cave. And in the cave, there was a big stone table. And I could see there was somebody sitting at this table. It was a little girl. She would have been about 7 years old, very fair. She really was a luminous being. And she referred to me as her mother, which was really interesting because at the time I was, early 20s, so super young. And I still, don't have children at the moment, so it was an interesting experience. I've since reflecting on that have wondered whether it was my inner child, or perhaps I have children in different dimensions, who knows? But she referred to me as her mum, and she beckoned me to sit down at the table with her, across from her. And this stone table was engraved in this beautiful Celtic knotwork. It was stunning. But as she touched the table, it liquefied and began to move, and an ancient map appeared within the stonework. And she started to point to different areas and land masses that lit up under her fingers. And she said, "Mummy, this is where you're going to go. You're going to go to these places." And as she touched these places, I could see this illumination, like this undercurrent that was rippling through the liquid of the table, almost like these serpentine currents that move beneath the earth were illuminating as her finger touched these spaces, sort of mimicking or mirroring me going to these places. And she was telling me that as I go to all these places, I would be picking up my memories. So it was almost like an invitation to go on a grand adventure, to attune myself to the earth and to remember. And the next moment, the back door of this cave opened and two other figures came through the back door. One of them I recognized straight away as Merlin. So it was just a very interesting and magical kind of experience. And he stood behind her, and then a woman who I knew to be a fairy queen came out, and she was more of a full-bodied older woman, very beautiful, but like just she was made of the earth. Her hair was made of butterflies. She was just this thriving epicenter of life and very magical. So it was really interesting to sit there opposite these three beings: Merlin, a fairy queen, and a little fae girl who apparently was my daughter. So that was quite the experience. And I think at that time, although I would have loved to have stayed longer and asked more questions, the meditation in the outer world was coming to a close. So I came out of that space and was like, whoa. And the first thing I wanted to do was book a round the world ticket. I was like, I know what I have to do. I hear the call. I am being beckoned. That is my life's path. That is my journey. I'm going to go to pick up all my memories all around the world. So lo and behold, off I went, and I did buy a round the world ticket that was starting in South America and went up to Mexico, North America, across to Europe. I planned on going all through Europe and all the islands and Scotland and all those places, Ireland, Wales, all my ancestry, and then down into India and all through Southeast Asia before I came home to Australia. But of course, that was also probably a little bit of a naive understanding of how things work and how life works, because my journey really has been like, gosh, it's already 20 years or so since then, and I'm still on the path and I'm still picking up the memories. And it definitely is not something that could just be done in one trip. It's a lifelong work. And so I want to continue with these stories. I'm writing all about it, but I'd like to continue with these stories video form, because it's easier to sometimes just speak it out. It's definitely happening a lot faster than writing. Just to accompany this particular journey that we're doing within our bodies. Like, we're doing the pilgrimage within the body, working with the crystal frequencies to activate and remember all of the insights that are within these temples within our bodies. And so I felt it was important to start sharing stories as we're journeying through our bodies. We don't have to travel out into the world to remember. Just as we're working outside in the world, we can also go inside. And there is so much to be found within the wisdom of our bodies. So that was my first real insight into the inner world, into the sacred chamber of my heart. So stay tuned for the next story of this adventure. And I might jump around from place to place, but it's, this was a good starting point, right at Sacred Source, and to be continued.